Rewind back to February of 2020. You remember those days, don't you? Even though we didn't realize it yet, the world was on the brink of a massive worldwide pandemic that would shift our lives way more than we realized. Before the shutdown began in early March, one of our last in-person services was Commitment Sunday, where hundreds of you turned in pledges for our new building campaign. For months leading up to that day, we had been talking about the new day that we believed God was leading us into. We knew we had to make some significant changes to better reach the next generation, to help more and more people find and follow Jesus. Many of us had this gut instinct that new, big, good things were on the horizon for our church. And so, the Forward Project began. One of our goals for this 2-year campaign was to raise $9.6 million. About half of that would cover our normal ministry budget so we could experience God through our weekly worship services, kids and student ministry, and the literally hundreds of other events we hosted throughout these 2 years. Beyond our ministries, we also gave away $1.3 million over these 2 years to missionaries around the world and to support church planting here in the U.S. The remaining $4.5 million from the campaign is going toward our exciting building expansion project, which includes brand new spaces for our kids and student ministry, as well as renovation and expansion throughout our existing building. 2 years later, we're beginning to see those things come to life. In fact, the new day isn't some abstract future thing to look forward to someday. The new day is here, now, and we believe good things are in progress. Among the most visual changes, we're so excited that both Joe Skillen and Andy Owen have joined our staff this year. Remember, your gifts to the Forward campaign fund the building project and our budget, so your giving made it possible to bring them on board. Both of these men are skilled communicators, excellent leaders, and a great fit for our Ridgepoint family. And this past year alone, in 2021, our church family saw more than 170 first-time guests join us in person on Sundays, with hundreds more checking us out online. We collected our largest big offering in church history this past Thanksgiving when we gave away $136,000 to ministries outside our budget. But here's the best news. We celebrated 32 baptisms and 28 salvations last year. That is why we're here at all, to help people find and follow Jesus. And the other really exciting thing, the new building is finally happening. This timeline certainly isn't what we originally hoped for, but this is a process we didn't want to rush. Speaking of things not going according to plan, a worldwide pandemic is not an ideal time to start a building campaign. Despite all that pain and heartache, God has proven to be faithful, and so have you. When we worked out our projections of where we hope to be at the end of the campaign, we are remarkably close to the bold goals we set way back in 2020. That would be a huge accomplishment any year, let alone during this extra challenging season. Thank you for your continued generosity. So even though today marks the end of this campaign, we are far from finished. Obviously, the building still requires a lot of work, and we need to raise more funds. But more importantly, we want to continue to do the hard work of becoming the kind of people we believe Jesus calls us to be. We aim to be real people with a real faith, making a real impact. We want to reach out to unchurched young families in our community in ways we never have before. And we want an increased zeal, a passion and excitement, and a genuine desire to see God's kingdom come now to Wichita as it is in heaven. So thank you again for your generosity that has made this project possible. And we ask for your continued prayers and generosity as we together move forward. A quick prayer, and then I want to preach. Father, thank you. Thank you for the journey we've been on. Thank you for the celebration of this day. Thank you for what's ahead. And over these next 25 whatever minutes, I pray that you would, oh Father, despite my weakness, may your strength be seen. In Jesus' name, amen. So, question. Why do we celebrate birthdays or anniversaries? Why do we celebrate 25 years at the same place of business? Or why do we celebrate retirement? Why do we celebrate being given the news that we're cancer-free? Why do we celebrate that stuff? Why do we celebrate that we're debt-free? I had a guy after the last service came up and he says, this last week we took our whole family out because we wanted to celebrate that I have now completed my 100th chemo treatment and I'm still alive and kicking. Like, why do we celebrate this stuff? We celebrate it because it's a milestone, it's a victory, it's a win. You know, every day we ought to be in some manner celebrating the fact that Jesus Christ gave us another chance. Like we celebrate wins. And it's just part of in our nature of as humanity that we want to say, hey, let's celebrate. I mean, have you ever been to a wedding where they didn't even serve some cake or peanuts or punch or even a meal or anything? No. And we celebrate good events with food. And people have always done that. We're celebrating today at 11 o'clock it starts. A big feast today. We have a new group of people in our church. I'm calling them the Ridge Point Smokers, okay? And we bought over 250 pounds of pork butt, okay? I always wanted to say that word on Sunday mornings. But we bought 250 pounds of pork butt, and these Ridge Point Smokers, they put it in some smoker, and we've got some delicious meat, pulled pork today. We've got a full-out meal. We've got a dessert bar. Like, go and gorge yourself, right? We've even got some chicken nuggets for the kids or the young at heart, okay? But we have always celebrated as humanity the wins in our life. Sometimes the celebration is just a smile and a shake your fist a little like you did it. So you're at work and you finally closed a deal that you've been working on for a long time, and you lean back and you scoot your chair back and you just celebrate with this. That's enough. And sometimes we throw an all-out party. Now, I'm convinced that the reason it's wired into us to celebrate wins is because that's who God is. God celebrates wins. It's part of his nature, and we're in the nature of God, in the image of God. In Luke 15, Jesus tells a story about a really rebellious, bad son who took all his inheritance ahead of time and went off and squandered it in all kinds of wild living and sinning. And when he reached the proverbial bottom of the barrel and he came to his senses, he decided to do a change of heart, and he went back home. And when he got to his father's house, what did they do? He threw a party, because that's a win. And Jesus in Luke 15 says, all of heaven rejoices over these kinds of wins. It's just part of God's heart to rejoice over wins and achievements. In fact, in the Old Testament, God actually required 7 separate annual celebrations. So more than every other month, like 7 times a year, Israel was supposed to pause and celebrate God's goodness in some fashion. There were these seven festivals, and they all said, this is why we're celebrating. God, you displayed your goodness in this way or this way. Now, the biggest celebration of the year was Passover, and it was the annual celebration of God's rescue of Israel out of the slavery under the Pharaohs. You know, Moses and the 10 plagues. Okay? And in Exodus 12, God said, you must, it's a command, you must celebrate this day as a festival to the Lord. It's just part of God's heart to celebrate wins. It's part of our heart to celebrate wins. And what we've been through over the past 2 years with the Forward campaign, we're wrapping it up this week, okay? What we've been through is nothing short of a win that is worth celebrating. Now let me rewind the tape to the fall of 2008. We were just launching a 3-year campaign to raise $5 million for the room you're all sitting in right now and a bunch of renovation. That was in the fall of 2008. You know what else happened in September, October 2008? That was the nationwide housing market collapse. And I remember we were all still meeting in the activity center. That was our only big room. Remember, some of you were here. Those hard, white, uncomfortable chairs that were over there, okay? We were all meeting in there. And I remember standing in front of our church family in the fall of 2008, just as we were launching the campaign for this room and the housing market collapsed. And I said, a bunch of your 401ks just became 201ks. And it makes no sense for us to continue with this dream. But God is in the business of doing what doesn't make sense. And you dug in 2008, and despite the financial stretch, despite the fears, despite the uncertainty, you dug in and you did it. Like in 2010, we moved into this big room. 10 years later, 2020, we're now launching the Forward campaign, a 2-year effort to raise $4.5 million toward this big $8 million project. And I wonder, can't prove it, it's just what knocks around in my 3.5 pounds up here, okay? I wonder if God wasn't looking down on us in February of 2020. And he's saying, you know, back in 2008, I tossed a little bit of a challenge on you in that last campaign. The housing market collapsed. And I think I'm going to drop a pandemic on you this time. And I think you're going to do just fine. Now, I can't prove that's what God was thinking. I'm not into trying to solve the ins and outs of where the pandemic came from. All I'm saying is that God trusted us to take some steps of faith to launch our only 2 big building projects here in the middle of a housing collapse and in the middle of a pandemic. In the Old Testament is the story of Moses, who, as I mentioned earlier, led Israel out of slavery in Egypt. They escaped, and now they found themselves with the Red Sea in front of them and the pursuing Egyptian army hot on their tails behind them, trapped between water and an army. And it was at this point that God instructed Moses to stand on the shore of the Red Sea, feet on dry ground, hold out his staff, and believe that God was going to part the Red Sea. And miraculously it happened, right? The waters parted, and Israel walked across without getting their shoes wet. They walked on dry ground. Fast forward 40 years later. Now Joshua is leading Israel. They've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they're about to enter the promised land. But they're facing a body of water in front of them, the Jordan River. But this time, God ups the ante, okay? This time, God says, hey, last time, I privileged Moses to stand on dry ground, and the rest of Israel walked on dry ground. This time, the priests are going to lead, and Israel's going to start walking into the water before it parts. But you start walking in, and you need to believe as you get deeper and deeper into the water of the Jordan River that the waters will part. You see what God did? He expected more 40 years later. And I think that's just life. That God said, I expect you to survive a housing collapse. But now, 10 years later, I'm going to raise the ante on this because you should have more faith 10 years later. I'm going to drop a pandemic on you that will shut down the church for 16 weeks. No people in the room. Everything moves to online. I'm going to drop a pandemic because this time you have to step into the water. You step into the water and you take the risk of believing that after you have stepped into the waters will part. And we did it. Against all odds. And this isn't to pat ourselves on the back, far from it. But today is a celebration of what happens when God's people step out in faith against the odds and do what doesn't make sense. So today, we do celebrate the risks that so many of you took in the middle of a pandemic, job loss, uncertainty, to continue to give generously and to trust that God's going to provide. We celebrate those risks. We celebrate standing together in the middle of a pandemic and not letting it divide us, not letting it implode us, not letting it shut us down permanently. We celebrate so many of us who stood together on our common mission to say, we're here to reach the next generation. We want as many people to find and follow Jesus. And so we even celebrate today by faith what God is going to do for the next 5 and 10 and 25 years. We are not building this expansion, this building for tomorrow. We're not building it for next year. We're building it for 5 and 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. Because over these decades that will follow us, your generosity in getting this thing done is going to literally, no exaggeration, reap thousands of lives, right? And that's why we do this thing. And so I say thank you for what you've done. Turn to 1 Thessalonians 4:1. We got 2 verses I want to just briefly unpack this morning. The first is 1 Thessalonians 4:1, and here's what it says. Finally then, we ask and encourage you in the Lord Jesus, that as you have received from us how you must walk and please God, as you are now doing, do so even more. So Paul, a great first century missionary and church planner, had spent some time in Thessalonica, Greece. And this church that he started ended up being a pretty healthy church. And he writes a letter later on back to the church. And he didn't even do a lot of chiding or correcting like he did for a lot of the other churches that he had pastored and wrote letters to. The church at Thessalonica was doing things pretty good. In fact, the overall message of the book of 1 Thessalonians is this one verse from chapter 4, where Paul writes and says, you were all first-generation Christians. You didn't grow up in a Christian home. This thing's all new. And I spent some time with you, and I instructed you the way you should think and live so that you could be pleasing to God in your day-to-day life. I told you how to do that, and guess what? You've been doing it. Thank you. Now, do it more and more, okay? And that's what I think Paul would say to Ridge Point. We are far from a perfect church. You're sitting there and I'm standing here. We are so far from perfect, but these are the only people we welcome into our church, are messed up people. That's the only ones we'll welcome. And so we're far from perfect, but I think Paul would write the same thing to us. You've done well, thank you. You dug deep, 2008. You dug deep, 2020. You survived the housing collapse, and you've survived a pandemic, and against all odds, you please God, so thank you. Job's not done. Still got a building to pay for. We're not done with our mission, but well done. Now just do it more and more. I think that's what he would say to Ridge Point. I really like the big picture perspective. Here's the second verse, 2 Corinthians 5:9. I love this big picture. This is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible right here. But it says this, whether we're at home or away, that means whether we're on earth or in heaven, this life or the next one, we make it our aim, our purpose, our goal to be pleasing to God. The reason God gave you breath to wake up this morning, allowed you to let your feet hit the ground and stand up and do something. The reason God gave you breath today was not just so you could do this or do that or love your kids or, live another vacation, whatever. He gave you breath so that you could please him. And what I like is our job description between earth and heaven is exactly the same. The reason God gave you breath on earth is that you would live to please him in the way you think and the way you behave. And when you get to heaven, nothing changes. I remember when in junior high, we moved to Indonesia, where my folks were missionaries. And my little 12-year-old brain just encountered a lot of culture shock. And people looked different. They were all brown and short. Different language, different culture, different food. And it was what you call culture shock. I do a pitiful job on a lot of days in pleasing God. But I do want, over the course of my life here on earth, to live with such consistency of pleasing God in how I think and how I behave, that when I get to heaven, I won't experience much culture shock. Like, I don't want to get to heaven and say, wow, I wasn't living like this down there. I mean, I know it's going to be perfect up there, and everything we do will be to please God, and we will not fail in that. All I'm saying is I love this big picture because our goal in life, here or there, doesn't change. We exist to bring pleasure to God, to honor him. Okay? I've talked in the past about finite and infinite goals. So, a finite goal is something you can finish. You can check the box. You cross the finish line. Mow the lawn, wash the dishes, graduate from high school. Check, check, check. That's a finite goal. You've done it. You say, my goal is to get that promotion. You get it? Check. It's done. That's a finite goal. Okay? An infinite goal are these two verses that we've looked at. To please God more and more. An infinite goal would be to be a better and better spouse, a better and better student, a better and better employee, a better and better boss, a better and better friend, a better and better Christian. And as people, we need finite goals to say, I did it! Check! And we need infinite goals because there's something important in the purpose of life to set our goals high. And so we have these infinite goals. So there's a sense in which a finite goal has been checked. The end of this month is the end of the forward campaign. It's done. It was a 2-year check. But it's an infinite goal to stay on mission to help people find and follow Jesus. It's an infinite goal to keep giving at your current level of generosity or more. That's an infinite goal. It's not like, okay, I gave a little extra for these last 2 years, now I'm going to slack off. No, like there are finite goals and infinite goals. So I want to say thank you. And I don't know, I don't know if you know how much I love you and love this church. I don't mean to be all sappy moment here, but genuine to the core, I'm proud of this church. And I want to say thank you for the journey you've chosen to walk on the last couple of years. I just mean that sincerely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank our leadership board. In the best of senses, they have held my feet to the fire, pushing me, confronting, encouraging, reminding me to lead with intentionality and integrity, to stay on point with our goal of helping people find and follow Jesus. And they have been such a source of strength for me over these last 2 years. And also I want to thank our staff. I just love our staff. They love the Lord. They live with integrity. They love you. They love this church. They're on board with the mission, and they have poured countless hours and energy into this project over the last 2 years. So I truly am so grateful and just want to say thank you. Are you ready for some numbers and some reasons to celebrate? Okay, here we go. So 2 years ago, we set the bold goal of, as you saw in the video, raising $9.6 million. 5.1 of that was for what we would call our ministry budget. It's everything that happens from womb to tomb, from birth to student to kids to all the ministries. It's all of our overseas stuff. It's all of our church planning. And yeah, I hope you didn't miss this on the video. But of the 5.1 million, 1.3, over 1.3 million, we gave away to missions. Like, who does that while you're trying to raise money for a building program? Like, we keep looking forward and looking out. So 5.1 is the local and global and all of our ministry, but then 4.5, okay? And that's the part we were trying to make. Now, we have made, and we got one more week left today. Who knows what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 days before the end of the month, right? But we have made it to 96% of our $9.6 million budget, okay, goal, okay? And there's no apology in that. I'm telling you, our consultant said on a good year, getting to 96% on the 9.6 million is a victory. And you did it during a pandemic. Way to go. So that's cause for celebration. Here's some more numbers here. At the beginning of this campaign, you, the Ridgepoint family, set a cap of $8.1 million for the building project, okay? Now, our 2-year goal, where we made 96% so far, our 2-year goal was raise 4.5 of that 8.1, okay? But that left a gap of $3.6 million. That's what we will still owe, right? We still got to pay that off. That's how it works. But as many of you know, like, I don't know of a single other church on the planet that has experienced this blessing, okay? As many of you know, there's a family from our church who has unsolicited. They've offered, and they will be loaning us $3.6 million interest-free. Like, so we will be in debt, but we won't be paying a penny of interest. Like, do we deserve that? No. But this is why we celebrate, because God is dumping these blessings on us, and we do not deserve it, but He is so good to us. All right, some more numbers. Of the 8.1 million, this sounds like a big number, but roughly 2.2 million, 2,163,000, is for the architectural fees, for furnishings, for tech. And that sounds like a big number, but that's how it works on projects like this. So you build a house, then you got to furnish it all, right? And so of the 8.1 million, roughly 2.2 is for furnishings and tech and architectural and behind-the-scenes expenses. That means that when we then put this project out for bid, that means we invite different contractors to tell us how much they'll charge us to build the building. That amount needs to be under 5.9 million. Okay? So we had 7 contractors that we invited to make bids. In Wichita, there's not many more companies besides that can handle a project of this size. So all 7 companies came to our church a month or 2 ago, and they toured the facility, and they met with the architects to get all their questions. And then we invited all of them to submit bids. As it turns out, 3 of them turned in bids. 4 of them said, don't have the capacity, or we're not ready to take on that project. So 3 of them turned in bids. Now, many of you have heard how over the last 2 years have you heard the phrase supply chain issues? Okay? Like, you can't get anyone to come to your house to do anything anymore, right? Because they don't have the supplies. It's back ordered, okay? But supply chain issues, you've heard of the rising labor costs, and you've heard of the skyrocketing material, like steel's gone up X% or whatever. And so we were, rightly so, bracing ourselves for bids significantly higher than 5.9. And honestly, preparing ourselves, rightly so, to say, how would we adjust when the bids came over? Ready? All three bids came in under $5.9 million. Okay? Like, the architect, when they opened the bids of these three companies, all three came in under bid. And the architects were jaw-dropping, surprised. Like, how's this happen? This should not. My first question is, did we give them all the pages of the blueprints? Like, did we leave off a third of it? But no, they got it all, right? And it's a stunning, like, we still can't figure out why God would bless us this way. And I wonder, I can't prove it, I wonder if God said, I'm proud of you, Ridge Point. 2008, you charged through a housing collapse. 2020, you charged through a pandemic. I'm going to drop a little thank you on you. And I'm going to surprise the world with three bids that are under the targeted amount. So Conco Construction had the lowest bid, almost $470,000 under the 5.9, and they have been awarded the bid. So, are you ready to mark your calendars? Here we go. So after years of delay, it feels, and an unending pandemic and lots of hardship and delayed things, April 24. So we're talking like next month, we're going to have groundbreaking right out there on Sunday morning, the 24th. It's going to be a great day. It is happening. Now, I put May-ish. Did you see the parentheses with the word ish in it? Okay. We don't foresee the future, but we have every indication is that in May, so a month and a half, 2 from now, we're going to start seeing stuff happen, and this church is going to enter an exciting 1-year period. Completion date, springish, Mayish of 2023. So this, my friends, is reason to stand and applaud and come on, give a little hoot and holler. All right, here we go. Let's just thank the Lord right now. This is worth celebrating.